How's it going, everybody? So in this video, I want to be discussing some actual measurable, tangible health markers that you can actually measure using blood tests that pretty much any doctor will allow you to get, so that you can actually determine if you're actually healthy. I made so many videos over the years talking about this mythical nirvana of health syndrome that people tend to get into, where they are striving for this idea of health that does not actually exist, and therefore they're like a rat on a spinning wheel getting nowhere, and they're more so infatuated with the idea of some kind of pinnacle of health compared to actually obtaining and embodying real, actual, measurable, realistic health. Okay. So here are the blood markers that we need to be striving for, okay, at a baseline. So the first one I would say would be hemoglobin A1c. So there's a lot of debate as far as LDL cholesterol, HDL, and even triglycerides. And LDL, lipoproteins, they're not actually cholesterol. They're more so carrier molecules that carry things such as cholesterol throughout the blood and the body. But as far as hemoglobin A1c and blood glucose control, it is not debatable. If you have blood sugar dysregulation, you are at risk for the vast majority of diseases that are plaguing most of society, okay? Metabolic diseases, so even things like cancer, many forms of cancer, there is an association with diabetes and hemoglobin A1c. Okay, we know for sure things like blood pressure as well as obesity have a pretty direct link, I would say, with blood sugar, diabetes, and hemoglobin A1c. More specifically, hemoglobin A1c. And even heart disease. So there are papers that certain like vegan gurus like to use that they quote. There's a graph from the American Heart Association that they claim shows a direct linear increase in heart attack incidences in LDL levels. But what they don't tell you is, number one, the groups in the lowest percentile, or the lowest cohort, who have the lowest LDL levels and supposedly have like zero heart attacks, it's N equals 2. There's only 2 people in the group with the lowest LDL levels. And the more people that are added in the group, you see more and more variance in both heart attack and non-heart attack, depending on their LDL levels. And so what it says in the fine print of that study is LDL levels and heart attack incidence tends to be a lot more prominent, and there tends to be more of an association only within the confines of pre-existing diabetes. And so LDL, when you put that into the equation, it becomes a very foggy picture. But there's also many studies or reevaluations of certain data sets, such as like Framingham, for example, have been done, where they actually show LDL has a very small, if any, correlation with heart disease, outside of already having pre-existing issues with HDL, triglycerides, and hemoglobin A1c. So basically what this is leading us to is that it seems like hemoglobin A1c is a primary marker that is almost, as far as I'm concerned, might be a prerequisite to the cascade that eventually turns into heart disease. So this is not always the case all of the time. But what I'm getting at here is hemoglobin A1c, as far as I'm concerned, is inarguably one of the most important blood markers that we should be measuring on a regular basis. And you need your hemoglobin A1c, HA1c, below 5% is what I would say if you want to be optimally healthy. So generally speaking, I would say 4 to 5% is probably a decent range to be in, right? Now, typically they'll say 5.7% and above is when you start to see the beginnings of diabetes. But I think a safe marker is anything under 5%. Okay, 4 to 5% is a good range to aim for. And if you're under 4%, maybe you're on a ketogenic diet, right? But that hemoglobin A1c basically is a test that measures the average fluctuations and variance in your blood glucose over time. And so there's a lot of factors involved in that, in the things that influence the outcomes of that test. Someone on a hemoglobin A1c or someone on a freaking ketogenic diet is unlikely to experience, such highly abnormal levels of hemoglobin A1c. Typically, clinicians a lot of times who are up to date on the low carb research will actually prescribe diets utilizing lower carb diets to lower the hemoglobin A1c. But there's many other protocols you can use. Simply increasing your activity level and restricting calories, even if you're eating processed foods, can also lower your hemoglobin A1c levels. And clinicians typically will use hemoglobin A1c as the primary blood marker for diagnosing type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. Simply from what I can gather, it's mostly because it's the most accessible and the cheapest on the insurance. At least that's what I'm assuming. But fasting insulin might actually be a better predictor. Might be able to predict diabetes or prediabetes, anywhere from 5 to 10 years before it'll even show up on a hemoglobin A1c test. With all of that being said, the factors involved that influence diabetes are so glaringly obvious that it's like if you weren't expecting to have diabetes by the time your hemoglobin A1c reaches like over 6%, I don't know what to tell you. But with all of that being said, hemoglobin A1c, make sure it's under 5%. Okay. Prediabetes starts at 5.7%, and then I think diabetes starts at like 6.5. I might be wrong. So after that, we have triglycerides. So typically, the reference range is anything under 150 milligrams per deciliter for triglycerides is considered healthy, supposedly. Now, from what I've seen, my clients who get on a carb-controlled diet, like it literally even consuming fruits and things like that, but just eating, protein-centric nutrition, and they're on a regular exercise routine consisting of supersets in particular and high-intensity interval training. Typically, or people, especially if you're on a ketogenic diet, even some of my clients who weren't doing any cardio at all, they were doing kind of like, lower volume powerlifting training, but they're on a ketogenic protocol and still had a pretty high percentage of body fat on them, easily just by lowering their carbohydrate intake, could get their triglycerides under 100 milligrams per deciliter. Actually down below 80, as a matter of fact. So anyway, for me personally, what I see is if you can get your triglycerides under 120 milligrams per deciliter, that's a beginning point of pretty good. But I think under 100 milligrams per deciliter is probably your best range as far as like preventing things like heart disease and having pristine metabolic health, right? The nirvana of metabolic health. But if you have it under 120 milligrams per deciliter, you're way better off than a lot of people. But under 100 is probably ideal for preventing most of these diseases: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, etc. So for those who don't know, so triglycerides in the blood, okay? A lot of times what happens, at least mechanistically, so typically what you'll see if you have high triglycerides, a lot of times you'll also see non-alcoholic fatty liver disease as well. There seems to be a pretty strong correlation between triglycerides and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And a primary reason why that seems to be the case is because high triglyceride levels typically seem to happen from just an overconsumption or an overfilling of energy stores in the liver. So, you have kind of like the calorie counting people who believe that restricting calories and increasing the amount of energy you're expending through exercise is a be-all end-all of all of this. And that's fine because it's true. But carbohydrate intake is kind of like a primary, as far as I'm concerned, primary mechanism. So check it out. Basically what happens is if you're consuming too many carbohydrates or too much energy in general coming in to where you're consuming more than you're burning, your liver glycogen becomes full, okay? You start to fill out your liver glycogen, and over time, when your glycogen is full, carbohydrates and energy in general has to be stored as fat. And so when you have an excess of energy, whether it's coming from carbohydrates or just, calories in general that you're not burning, your body starts to deposit fat in the liver and fat in the adipose tissue, that's body fat. So you start to see, obesity or, unhealthy levels of body fat. You'll start to see, if you check it, indicators of fatty liver disease that's developed regardless of alcohol consumption. And then, of course, you start to see triglycerides spilling over into the blood. So the reason why you have triglycerides spilling over into the blood is because your body's having trouble holding on, or it's already full. Like your body can only store so much glycogen, and then it starts to deposit that extra energy as fat if it's not being burnt off. And so you see a spillover of fatty acids in the liver, this fatty liver, spilling over of fatty acids in the blood, that's high triglycerides, and fatty acids being deposited as body fat. So, and again, if it fits your macros or evidence-based gurus, if you want to call them that, they'll typically kind of chalk this up to calories in versus calories out. And they're not wrong. But in particular, what I see and what a lot of evidence suggests is it's specific to the glycogen and glucose overfilling. And so a suggested mechanism onto why this is the case, it's kind of like, so when you are an alcoholic, right, and you're just over consuming alcohol, you start to see alcoholic fatty liver disease over time. And the reason why is because the liver has to metabolize alcohol and break it down. And eventually the liver starts to have trouble doing so, and it starts to cause some of the molecules or the byproducts of alcohol metabolism starts to build up, causing fatty liver disease. And so, alcohol consumption is also directly linked to triglyceride levels in the blood as well. There seems to be a similarity in the way glucose and glycogen is metabolized, or glucose is metabolized in the liver, that seems to be very similar to alcohol and glucose in the liver. So, also kind of apologize in advance if this sounds kind of shaky. I have not really been looking into health research in a long time as of now. It's been at least 6 months. My mind has been a lot more deeply involved in strength and conditioning, and also some of the school work I've been doing that has nothing to do with my major, which is nutrition science. So, yeah, making these videos are more so a good refresher for those parts of my brain to start rejuvenating, I guess. But anyway, a lot of y'all who follow fatty liver disease and triglycerides will understand. But yeah, so basically it's a overconsumption of energy coming in without enough energy being burnt off that causes this energy to get stored and transported as extra fatty acids. So that causes triglycerides. So blood triglycerides are just blood fats, essentially, and it's spilt over from excess energy. It's not being burnt off. So how you lower your triglycerides is similar to how you get your hemoglobin A1c down. So you want to be, preferably if you have high triglycerides, especially if you have high triglycerides and high hemoglobin A1c, which is very, very common. You want to be calorically restricting. You really do, because caloric restriction causes your body to be in an overall energy burning state, to where you're burning off any extra energy you might have, and the energy excess is what caused it to begin with. And over time, your body will become more sensitive to glucose and carbohydrates, and it will burn off a lot of the triglycerides and the fats because it needs energy, because it's not coming in from your diet if you're in a caloric deficit. And so you'll start to see blood sugar regulation over time. Hemoglobin A1c starts to go down into the healthy range. Extra triglycerides in the blood start to be burnt off until your triglycerides go down, 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 until they're below 120, and then hopefully eventually under 100 milligrams per deciliter. Pretty much you can kind of look at it as too many high glycemic load carbs and too much overall caloric energy coming in versus going out in general. But you will see triglycerides and hemoglobin A1c go down on ketogenic diets, whether you calorically restrict or not. And I do have studies directly comparing the meat-based, high-fat, high-sodium Atkins diet to a Dean Ornish diet and an American Heart Association diet. It's called the A to Z weight loss study. Look at the full text, and it actually compares all these blood markers we're talking about. And despite eating as many calories as they want, the Atkins group actually had 3 times the improvements in blood pressure, hemoglobin A1c, weight loss, and HDL over the course of 12 months. And they actually tested the cohorts, each group, like 4 times during the course of the study. So after we have triglycerides and we already have hemoglobin A1c, next we have high density lipoprotein, HDL. So HDL does not seem to necessarily play a causal role in diseases, although there's a lot of debate on whether LDL does as well. But there seems to be more evidence for LDL as a causal risk factor than there is for HDL. So HDL, high density lipoprotein, basically is it's a lipoprotein. It's a carrier molecule that carries cholesterol and other nutrients throughout the bloodstream, throughout the body. Think of HDL and LDL as boats carrying substrates and energy and nutrients in and out of various parts of the body. And basically HDL, so you probably want your HDL in the range of 50 to maybe 80 milligrams per deciliter. For men and women, there's generally different ranges. For example, men, the healthy range is normally you want it over 40, whereas females, you want it over 50. And then generally, for both men and women, the ideal range is anything over 60 milligrams per deciliter. So that's some mainstream consensus. From what I can see, though, the data suggests probably around maybe 50 to 80 milligrams per deciliter is a good range for both men and women. And there seems to be negative consequences with having an HDL level above 80 milligrams per deciliter. Like there are certain disease states where HDL levels go over 100 milligrams per deciliter, and we see a significantly increased rates of heart disease at that point, which is weird. And there's a lot of evidence on pharmaceuticals and genetic polymorphisms between HDL and LDL cholesterol that kind of suggests LDL has more evidence as a causal risk factor for heart disease than HDL does. I have a whole video kind of discussing the science on that, so you might want to look at that, because I don't want to, that's a little bit too complicated to get into for this video. But basically you want your HDL levels in that range, probably, like, I would say, to be safe, 60 to 80 milligrams per deciliter. So HDL seems to be more so a proxy for high states of metabolic health. Typically you'll see with your insulin sensitivity and your blood sugar control, when that starts to improve, your HDL level will improve, and so will your triglycerides. It's really interesting how triglycerides, hemoglobin A1c, and high-density lipoprotein, these are some health markers that are consistently correlated with heart disease and even things like cancer risk, and obviously diabetes. And they're always in the discussion, but they're all indicators of your blood sugar control and your metabolic health. And so when you go on a higher fat, or just like when you start to control your carbohydrate intake, and even if you just go through a pretty significant bout of fat loss and you're eating relatively healthy, all these markers tend to improve. Now, high density lipoprotein and all of these markers actually improve the most when you eat a diet that is devoid of high glycemic load carbohydrates. And glycemic load is partly to do with the type of carbs you eat and how high they spike your blood sugar at one time, but also they take into account the volume of carbohydrates within each food. So, for example, there's studies that, there's some charts that might say fructose has like a glycemic index of like 50, and bananas have a glycemic index of like 100. But then when you consider the glycemic load of the food, the amount of carbs per volume, and how high it spikes your blood sugar at one time, you'll see that the banana, for the same amount of calories or whatever, has a much lower glycemic load overall, like under 30, whereas the fructose, or like the refined sugar, is like over 100. And so, and that's what really matters, though, is the total volume of these high glycemic load carbohydrates that you eat. So, like, if you eat a tablespoon of just like plain white sugar every day, it's not really going to affect you as much as consuming, let's say, 2 pounds of brown rice every single day, because the overall amount of carbohydrates you're eating is so low from that tablespoon of sugar that it's not enough to have a significant impact on your health over time. But, not to say brown rice is unhealthy, but it's so much more calories despite being from a whole food. So it's going to have a much more significant impact on your overall health markers if you eat more calories and or more carbs from an overall higher volume of carbohydrates compared to just like the type of food. It's the quantity involved that's really, really key. The dose does make the poison, but poison is still poison as well. So anyway, what I'm trying to say here is, if you really want to optimize all these things, so HDL is entirely, so you can easily boost your HDL level by changing the type of fats you eat. So number one, consuming an evidence-based dose of fish oil. So that equates to about a tablespoon of a high-quality fish oil per day, not cod liver oil. It doesn't have enough EPA in it. Not to say cod liver oil is bad. But you want about 2 grams of EPA omega-3 from fish oil every single day. That's about 3 teaspoons for most fish oil supplements. Some of them only 2. I take about a tablespoon of high-quality fish oil every day, and I think it's absolutely key for your brain health, for your mood, for your energy, for your sleep, and for your overall recovery. And all of these symptoms people call inflammation is really oxidative stress in the body, free radical damage. But HDL levels will definitely improve if you start to take a high amount of high quality fish oil every day. Your triglyceride levels will go down as well. This has been clinically shown. Fish oil is a very powerful medicine. Highly recommend you actually supplement fish oil regardless of your diet. 2 grams of BPA per day minimum coming from fish oil. That's how you get your HDL level up and triglyceride levels down, by just adding a simple supplement. Okay. The next thing is type of carbs you eat. So I do have a blog post where I make a carbohydrate hierarchy. If you're interested in that, ask me down below in the comments and I'll link it to you. But basically, I think fruit, with the exception of dried fruit for sure, and maybe bananas, is probably the number one best carb source to consume, because it's so high in minerals and in vitamins and other nutrients you don't get from whole animal sources. And the glycemic load is so low. It's really, really hard to get 1,000 calories from fruit, unless you're eating bananas maybe. But a lot of people that I've talked to says they can't eat more than 2 bananas in one sitting. I can't relate to that. I can easily eat 20 bananas in one sitting, and I have done that to get enough calories during times where I was an athlete on a carb-based protocol. These days, I'm actually a ketogenic athlete, which is interesting. I, for some reason, perform better without carbs. I don't know why. Well, I kind of do know why, but most people wouldn't agree with me. So, anyway, obviously, any carbohydrate source that is a whole food source is going to be a step in the right direction if you're coming from drinking sodas and eating refined carbohydrates. So obviously brown rice, and I would say avoid pasta and avoid bread. A lot of people will be like, oh, I eat whole grain bread, and it says 100% whole grain or something. But if you look on the ingredient list, there's a large portion of the ingredients that is white flour. And either way, flour is flour. When you grind up bread into these like specks of dust like flour, it becomes a lot easier to digest, easier to consume a larger caloric load from, and the spike of blood sugar becomes much more significant. And so I'm just saying, for someone who really cares about getting their HDL in a healthy range, their triglycerides lower, their freaking hemoglobin A1c in the healthy range, you have no business eating bread. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you're only eating it for taste, really, because it's convenient. And in reality, you should probably be consuming an overall lower load of carbohydrates in general to get these things into the healthy range. I would say at minimum 100 grams or less, and that'll easily get your calories low enough as well. But under 50 grams of carbs per day, 50 grams of net carbs per day, so it allows you a lot more wiggle room, is even better than ideal. Like, if you can get your net carbs under 50 grams per day, especially from whole food sources, but really from any sources, you're going to be well on your way to getting all of your blood markers in the healthy range. Basing your diet on proteins, very important. Higher protein intake generally, if anything, lowers your hemoglobin A1c, and it displaces a lot of the calories, especially low nutrient calories that you'd be getting from processed foods and foods that don't really have a lot of nutrients. Tames your hunger and actually causes over double the caloric burn than other forms of macronutrients. So protein has a higher thermic effect of feeding, and this is well documented, to where you're burning way more calories consuming higher protein. And it also gives your body the building blocks for neurotransmitters, the building blocks for immune system, and the master endogenous antioxidant glutathione, and the building blocks for muscle tissue, as well as, especially if you're consuming collagen and gelatin, things like glycine, which help you sleep at night, the building blocks for your connective tissue that generally is deficient in the American diet, even if you're consuming precursors, which a lot of people think is enough, but it's not. Anyway, So basing your diet on protein is going to be a tremendous help for helping you get your blood markers in a healthy range. Now, HDL cholesterol, again, is also going to be boosted by monounsaturated fat intake. Or it's not cholesterol, it's high-density lipoprotein. But so we already said fish oil can boost your HDL level. Monounsaturated fats like avocado oil, olives, and olive oil will definitely start to directly improve your HDL levels. That's a primary factor for boosting HDL in blood tests. And, there's a lot of people who believe the reason why the Mediterranean diet is so health promoting is because it's so high in monounsaturated fats and marine source EPA omega-3 fats, which are absolutely ideal for lowering triglycerides and increasing your HDL levels. Another thing that can improve HDL and lower triglyceride levels and lower your hemoglobin A1c is high intensity interval training. Okay, that's all of these things are clinically documented. These are used clinically to get these blood markers in a healthy range. And this is actually what I do for my clients who are trying to get their blood markers into the right ranges. We do lots of burpees with low rest times, mixed in with different forms of push-ups, different forms of lunges. We'll do planks to increase the overall aerobic kind of like endurance, muscular endurance component, anaerobic endurance, and lots of contrast training. So Antagonist Supersets, something you can do, especially if you work at a commercial gym, is get some dumbbells that your client can do for maybe like a 15 to 20 rep max or something, and then put them on the lat pull down machine, and you have them do a set of 12 lat pull downs relatively intensely but with good form, and then you have them do the dumbbell overhead press that they can normally do for like a 20 rep max. You have them do it for 12 reps, and they rotate between lat pull down and overhead press back and forth, and that gives them a really good cardiovascular conditioning component while also improving their muscular endurance, their strength, and improving muscle mass at the same time. You could do this with lunges and Romanian deadlifts. You do this with rows and chest presses, and just rotate, using muscular activities, giving them a conditioning effect, especially if you only have 30 minutes per session, like a lot of commercial gyms will give trainers. And so this is going to give them the high-intensity interval training type conditioning while improving muscle mass in a short amount of time, which is going to double down on burning calories because it's combining the cardio with the muscular strengthening, which has a much more prolonged double whammy effect. More muscle you have, more calories you burn, more insulin sensitive you become with more muscle mass, and the higher caloric burn from the overall work that is being done with these workouts is going to help burn up the calories and burn up the excess triglycerides and carbohydrates as well. So that's a good approach, and just increasing the volume of exercise overall. More walking, use the stairs instead of the elevator, park way far away from the grocery store, at the very end of the parking lot, wherever you go. Any chance you get to exercise, you should take it, no matter how intense it is. Because remember, the vast majority of fat loss that people actually, that you actually see, like for example, you might think, oh, that person has a fast metabolism. Well, no, actually, they just don't sit down all day. Like they have they're a barista at a coffee shop, or, they are a cook. They're always walking around or standing up all day. That calories that you burn from just everyday activity adds up over time. It really does. If you ever worked as a waiter or a waitress at a restaurant and you feel absolutely exhausted after working there, it's because of the overall amount of muscles being used all day and the calories, not to mention it can be really stressful. So keep that in mind when you're trying to get your body fat percentage down, your blood markers in the healthy range, is the overall volume of activity, even if it's not exercise done for the sake of exercise, is going to add up over time, and it's only going to help you. So any chance you get to be more active is a good one. Okay? And so remember, your body, so there's only essential proteins and essential fats. There's no essential carbohydrates. Even fiber, like it's just a fact. So when in doubt, get your essential fats. And HDL, you might need a little bit more calories from fat to improve. But triglyceride levels and hemoglobin A1c are directly impacted by the amount of carbs and the type of carbs you eat. So eating a lower glycemic load diet, something like a paleo or a ketogenic diet, is a good idea. Even though it's like trendy and it's a gimmick or whatever, the overall dietary pattern has amazing results. So I don't know why people talk crap about it, in a vulgar way. But you could easily just eat a whole foods diet that consciously restricts calories and just prioritize protein. 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. So if you are wanting to get to 180 pounds body weight, eat 180 grams of protein per day and actually track it. It's about 2 pounds of meat per day, give or take. I generally tell men to eat about 2 pounds of meat per day, women to eat a minimum of 1 pound of meat per day, but try to aim for 1.5 grams. It's so nutrient dense. It's so easy to not eat junk when you eat that much protein. You feel so much better. You sleep so much better. A lot of people, they realize, oh my God, like that was a missing link all along. Anyway, so yeah, remove all trans fats, remove high omega-6 seed oils, and reduce the overall volume of carbs you're eating and the type of carbs. Make sure that they're coming from whole sources. Remove breads and preferably remove pasta. Make sure if you're eating rice, it's brown rice. And when in doubt, just consume less volume of carbs. So let's say you're out at a party or something and they have like some kind of, maybe you get Mexican food or something and it comes with rice and beans. Look, if you're going to eat the rice and beans, eat them, but like don't go ham. And don't eat the rice and beans and the chips too. Like maybe have a couple chips, skip the rice, or have a little bit of rice, skip the chips. But if you're just letting yourself go ham on the just going to town on the freaking chips and the rice and everything, it's like, what the hell, man? That's not in alignment with improving your health. Not to mention they usually use hydrogenated oils, which drastically lower your HDL levels and just ruin your heart disease panels. Stay away from trans fats, hydrogenated oils, and preferably anything that potentially contains them. That includes refried beans and probably Mexican rice as well, even though it's so delicious. Unless it's homemade or you know what they use to make the rice and the beans and whatnot. But all of my ex-girlfriends were all from Mexico, so I know that I know what's in that shit, bruh. Even though it's delicious, right? Other things you can do would be like drink green tea, drink yerba mate, and even coffee. But coffee kind of has some differing level effects on triglyceride levels. But green tea, black tea, and yerba mate, they all have been shown in intervention studies to lower LDL, to improve your HDL, to help to regulate blood sugar, and to help improve triglyceride levels as well. Also, they have profound benefits on stress reduction, especially if you're like me and you drink like high-grade teas. There are some other like tonic herbs you can add into your routine, like gynostemma. I highly recommend Hyperion Herbs Organic Gynostemma. But there's other brands out there like Ron Tea Gardens. They have like a special Spring Dragon Herbs tea or something. There's also Immortality. I've ordered from them before. It's okay. But gynostemma is a great tea to consume to lower your LDL, improve your HDL, and overall regulate your glycemic response and your hemoglobin A1c. So gynostemma is key for this, I believe, if you're going to take anything. There are some other herbs and stuff that might help. Things like panic ginseng, but it's hard to find a good quality extract in that regard. So anyway, yeah, I would go with gynostemma. So, and remember, it's not gynema. Okay, it's gynostemma, also known as giagolon or miracle grass. Okay, stay away. Like, you got to be very careful about the type of herbs that you're consuming. Make sure it's the right one. Okay, just look for giagolon, right? Anyway, I'll talk to you all next time. Hopefully it's been informative. And if I'm missing anything, I'll make another video to go back and correct it.